Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is just eat meat, and that's what you should do. But if you're hiking or road tripping or stuck at work and you want something nutritious that is just meat, fat, and possibly salt, if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. I like this product not only because it is pure meat, but also because I really want the carnivore market to thrive as well. The more we support meat-only products, the more people will make meat-only products, and this will bring this into the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to check out, then take a look and use my discount code HTC to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
Hey everybody, we're back with another episode of the How to Carnivore podcast and YouTube series, and we're back with Anthony Chafee, as has been the norm lately. So welcome, Anthony.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
And our special guest, Dr. Pran Yoganathan, who is a gastroenterologist here in Sydney, and he runs the Centre for Gastrointestinal Health. And Pran is an absolute superstar on the socials as well, meme king. So if you're not following him, make sure you do now. So welcome, Pran.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Anthony. Nice to see you both, and great to be on the podcast.
Yeah, good to see you, man. Yeah,
likewise, good to have you here.
So we spoke on well, you've been on with both of us individually before, and we've kept in touch sort of on socials and everything like that. But since the last time we saw you, like, how have you been? What have you been up to? What's the update in Pranland?
Just building my practice, Anthony. Like, I'm very interested in metabolic health and root cause medicine. It's very difficult to do it as a gastroenterologist. A regulatory body is quite, they're quite strict on these sort of things. So the way I figured I'm going to do it, and this was a couple of years ago, I decided this was to build out a team. Like, no one person can tackle all the ills of the world, or all the ills of Australia, or even Sydney by themselves. So we need a good team to be able to do that. And I'm just focused on building the infrastructure of my practices, building out the team of dietitians and the doctors that staff it, and we're trying to tackle it as a team. Really, I think it's the best way to grow is to grow together rather than individually. So that's been my focus recently. Of course, the day-to-day running of the practice, because I'm still working as a gastroenterologist as well, and trying to juggle being a family man, father to 3 kids, and a lovely supportive wife. So just all these things happening in life at the moment, Anthony. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, no worries, man. And so, because you do have to focus in and probably stay around the gastroenterology, sort of realm. What is the focus of your practice now? What sort of patient cohort are you seeing, and how are you treating them, differently than you would have, in a traditional sort of modality?
Sure. Well, huge proportion of a gastroenterologist practice, Anthony, is irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome's classically been this thing where it's been a sort of almost a wastebasket diagnosis, where the patient comes in, tells you about their symptoms. A lot of it's related to bloating, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal pain. Reflux can go hand in hand with that sometimes, and we generally scope these patients, do endoscopies and colonoscopies to ensure that there's no structural problem, no diseases like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, cancers, so on and so forth. And once we don't find these things, we basically say, well, you've probably got irritable bowel, and go and see a dietitian about a low Fodmap diet. This is the classical diet that's been utilized in the past. Keeping in mind, and this is very important for your listeners to realize, the low Fodmap diet at its heart, at its very core, is in fact a low carbohydrate diet. The fermentable carbohydrates that we're talking about in these FODMAPs acknowledged as the problem. The issue that I've often seen with this diet is that it gets you to eliminate all these fermentable carbohydrates, but they don't tell you what to replace it with. Often don't tell you to up the intake of animal proteins and fats, which of course provide great satiety and great for us, and from a digestive perspective, quite easy for us to break down as well. So there's a lot of attrition rate with the FODMAP diet. A lot of people just end up not being able to do it because they eliminate, and not replace with the adequate things. You got to remember, just from a political and a conditioning standpoint, the message has been for the last 40 years that eggs and meats and these sort of things are bad for you. So people think somehow, equate these to things that create poor health, which is, of course, crazy. And I think all of us in this space are trying to change the mindset from that perspective. But I deal with a lot of irritable bowel. So I'd say 75% of my practice is irritable bowel. A lot of them are young patients, but there's a huge amount that are older than 40 or 50 and 60s and 70s, whatever, that type of age group, where there's coexisting gut issues and metabolic decline. So these people often have, visceral adiposity, obesity, blood pressure issues, heart attacks. They've gone through heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and a whole host of medications. And a feeling or a thought I had to myself a few years ago was, could irritable bowel syndrome just be metabolic syndrome in evolution? Starting from a very early stage as a child or as a young adult to this latter point. And I think it is. And that's the final sort of conclusion I'm coming up with, because we find when we switch people over to a diet that reduces the FODMAPs, cuts out the ultra-processed foods, and ups the animal protein and animal fat, people tend to do really well. And I think a lot of the nutritional issues disappear. That fermentative mode of digestion that people get when consuming a high carbohydrate diet diminishes, and we get them better. And what's interesting in some of the older patients with coexisting metabolic problems, man, their metabolic issues disappear. Like they put their type 2 diabetes into remission, their obesity starts improving, their quality of life goes up. So that's my practice. It's a mixed bag. I mean, I think I'm very well positioned as a gastroenterologist to capture people who've got inadequate diets or poor diets. I mean, it's a good space to be in. So I think as a specialist, I think I'm very not qualified. I mean, that comes across the cocky. I just think I'm in a position to be able to address people's diet. I think I'm very privileged from that perspective.
I think that as a gastroenterologist, I mean, you are directly dealing with the first effects of digestion and absorption of food and how this affects it at the very first level, and so if anyone is going to have some insights on that, I think it would absolutely be yourself and people in that space. And do you deal a lot with IBD like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis as well?
Yep, we do. My experience of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, it's been mixed. I think we've got to acknowledge that the people that seek us out actively, people like yourself, Anthony, and me, have often made their mind up that they are willing to undertake a diet, no matter how restrictive or how difficult or how deviated from their hyperpalatable diet of the past, like a standard Australian or a standard Western diet. They already made their mind up. So sometimes we can end up with populations that are basically ready to make the move, which is a great thing, which is good. They're motivated, they're ready to go, they've had enough of the standard medical system that doesn't address diet. So we tend to see really good results in people like that, right? But I see a mixed bag, Anthony. I mean, not many people know about my interest in nutrition. I'm still, as I said, a community gastroenterologist, so I get all sorts of people, and it's confronting for these people to hear that maybe that Special K, cereal or the Fruit Loops that they're having for breakfast might not necessarily be great for their type 2 diabetes or gut issues. So do we institute dietary changes for inflammatory bowel disease? Absolutely. But getting people to make that decision to do it is very, very difficult. And in the few that have made the decision to change, I've seen rapid resolution in ulcerative colitis in particular. I think Crohn's disease is a little bit more complicated, and I'm not sure exactly why that is, but there's something about the phenotype of Crohn's where we've seen great results as well with dietary changes, but there are also some where the dietary changes haven't made any difference to the progression of the disease. So this is where it's quite valuable, because I've got associates here that are gastroenterologists that have access to biologics and some of the higher grade drugs that we use. And often we use a combination in these sort of individuals of both lifestyle, dietary modification, sleep, and medications to try and get on top of that. So yeah, it's just to kind of summarize that question you've asked. We do see rapid resolution of inflammatory bowel disease with the dietary changes, but there are some cases where we don't. In addition, getting people to make the dietary changes when they're a fresh patient for you, not quite initiated in that pathway, that's very difficult.
Yeah, sort of, Pran, I see the kind of dietary recommendations that like Just Hurton puts out, and I've read some of the kind of publications that you guys have, and it's certainly a kind of a gentler message in a way to the sort of stuff that like Anthony and I talk about, which is, hey, if you want to be healthy, just eat meat and nothing else. Whereas, you know, I see the stuff that you guys put out and it's like, hey, eating lower carbohydrate is actually better for you. Hey, including some healthy fats from meat and salmon is good for you. Like, you know, that sort of stuff where you've really, people aren't going to turn on a dime. You know, you're trying to get people to turn a little towards a healthier lifestyle. So, you know, when I follow you two and look at the publications that are coming out, you know, it's all the same message. It's all trying to get people healthier in the same way, but yours is certainly more gradual and gentle, given the nature of, as you say, you're a community gastroenterologist.
Yeah, look, I was a cricket player. Anthony was a rugby player, so I guess
It is blocking. You're there for a while.
I'm the gentler one out of the two. Is that what no, look, it from experience, Simon, like, just if you've got individuals that are 60, 70 years in this dietary paradigm, they're conditioned, man, and it's not easy to snap them out of it. Whereas the greatest results we've had are with our younger patients. They're so much more malleable. They're maybe there's a little bit of neuroplasticity there where they can change their behavioral habits. We've had great results with younger patients. I'm not saying some of our older patients haven't had great results. They have, but we have to definitely get that gentle message across. And from what we've seen, it doesn't necessarily need to be a full carnivore spectrum. Some people enjoy carbohydrates, me included. And for these people, it's just about teaching them that this is in fact a fuel source, and you've got to try and earn this. And the right type of carbohydrate, refined versus unrefined, and hopefully one that's not, sprayed to high heaven with glyphosate. And these are the sort of basic principles that we're trying to teach them.
Yeah. Well, it's also, it's absolutely true. Some people just aren't ready for that, that message that, Simon and I are putting out there, and it can upset people, and I haven't gotten like the hate mail, like the vegan hate mail that a lot of people do. But, every now and then you'll get some comment going like, oh, this is BS. Like, how can you say X, Y, and Z? And I'll actually engage with them and just be like, okay, well, this is why, and, sometimes I can turn them around, and other times it's just a lost cause. And that's fine, but yeah, you're right. It's just that you can't hit everyone with the bulldozer, and, some people are just, you need to be coaxed into it, or at least getting that understanding that, like, okay, what we've been told for the last 40 years is may not actually be 100% true, and maybe start, sort of doing that, and just sort of, walking them towards, the, in the direction that actually meat's good for you. Actually, carbohydrates and sugar are problematic, and then, working on from that standpoint. But I also like the approach medically as a medical practitioner of trying to incorporate these things and doing the best that you can. And like you say, not everyone's going to respond to that and respond to that dietary message and be like, whoa, this is a little far out there. I don't want to do that. And that's fine. You do the best you can, but what, at least you're trying, because, a lot of doctors just be like, well, it's too hard to get people to change what to eat, so we just need to focus on medicine. I can give them a pill, that's easy. And I think that's, it's sort of giving up. And I did a sort of a live Q&A session actually earlier today. And one of the questions was that was just sort of a comment that, someone had said that, their son who had epilepsy, he was like 13, that someone suggested that he didn't go keto or carnivore because, while yes, this could be good for suppressing seizures or not precipitating seizures in the first place, if he ever had a cheat day or something like that, he'd be at risk of getting a seizure. And it turned out it was his neurologist that said this. And I was blown away. And it's just like, this guy is recognizing that this actually helps prevent seizures. And he's saying, don't do it, because, if you stop doing it, then you'll get seizures. You're recognizing that there are things in there that can precipitate seizures. I mean, that's insane. I mean, that's like telling someone to stay off their seizure medication, because if they ever stop their seizure medication, they'll have seizures.
Exactly.
It's like, well, right, you've just stopped your seizure medication then. So, and so I've spoken to neurologists that do the whole, it's really hard to get people to not eat carbs, even though we have 100 years of data and experiments showing that just a keto diet, not even a carnivore diet, is very efficacious for suppression of seizures. That it's difficult for them to get them off carbs. This guy's going the opposite. He's saying, no, don't do that. And I thought that was just crazy, so yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Anthony. That's super frustrating to hear. I mean, my heart rate's gone up about 20 bases just listening to that, because that's what we're experiencing as well. And what I've fundamentally come to the realization is, we've got gamblers, we've got addicts, we've got alcohol or drug addicts, we've got all forms of addicts, and sometimes they're judged, stigmatized by society. The reality that we've all got to acknowledge is as a society, we're addicted to food. We've engineered these hyper palatable foods. We've normalized this behavior and then socially engineered it. And not just socially, scientifically engineered it into the nutritional guidelines and so forth. And you've got these bureaucrats and various technocratic governances that spew forth this message repeatedly. So the reality is we are now addicted to the food. So, and you got to acknowledge the statistic, Anthony. We've spoken on this before, but 60 to 70% of our workforce, our medical workforce, is overweight or obese. So these individuals are fighting their own struggles day to day, and I think for them the thought of a dietary intervention for themselves is too difficult. So then they pass that bias on to the patient. They say, well, the patient can't do that either. So that's a very sad reality of where we stand. So really, the message that we're trying to put across is straight away, doubted or contradicted by this treating specialist or treating general practitioner with whom they might have had a relationship for 20, 30 years. So there's conflicting messages in this health space, and there's certainly, and that's certainly a barrier to good care.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts on that sort of top-down approach from the government, pushing these hyperpalatable foods, pushing just processed sugary garbage? Is that purely just a conflict of interest? The lobbyists, basically bribing politicians and paying for their campaigns and backdoor deals, and then they push and promote this as an industrial thing. Do you think it's just a financial issue, or do you think there's more going on there?
More going on there, I think, Anthony. We know that the beef lobby is relatively powerful in America. I mean, they lobby hard as well. So the question is, why can't their money be used to influence the dietary guidelines? The conclusion that I've come to is that the sugar lobby is just far more powerful, far more profit in that sugar industry,
much
and the
bigger margins.
Much bigger margins. So they've just got better money to play with. And I think in the end of the day, the dollar rules. I think, 1954, Henry Hass, who was the president of the Sugar Research Foundation, and his speech is stunning. He gave this to a bunch of nutritionists, and their speech basically went on to say that fat was a problem. Fat was what was causing heart disease, and sugar, if we could replace 30% of the calories from sugar, we would do better. 30% of the fat and replace it with sugar, we'd do better. And he fundamentally convinced, that lobby convinced people that we need sugar to run the body. Sugar is the fuel that runs our body day to day. Forgetting that we all carry kilograms of fat on us, even the leanest person. So it's been years of conditioning. The lobby's just gotten bigger. That industry's gotten powerful. We're talking about turnover in the billions. We've got to understand that cattle industry, whilst it can be profitable, certainly in the last couple of years in Australia, it's been very profitable. but does the farmer actually end up seeing that profit? And a lot of times it just doesn't happen, because as prices of transportation goes up, their margins getting eaten into. And I think that industry has always been a product. But the product's great, but the margin's not so flat, unfortunately. So I just think they've got less leverage when it comes to that lobbying side of it. And we've got to admit it. I mean, you might disagree, Anthony, and I'll definitely disagree as well. But and I'm sure Simon will as well. But sugar to a addicted person is just far more palatable than meat is. They've just been conditioned that way, and it releases much more of a dopamine hit. And I think it's easy to addict people to sugar. It's very hard to addict them to beef.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, to your point, I saw a figure that Dr. Lustig mentioned in one of his talks a couple of years ago, that and in his book where he discusses all of this, talking about how the sugar industry gross earnings is something like $1.3 trillion a year. And of that, about 400 billion is profit,
Huge.
And massive. And so, and then how they calculated it, we also spend about $2.4 trillion in the medical field just treating the effects of sugar consumption, just sugar, like that's it. So, there's about a $2 trillion disparity there. They're making 400 billion, but they're costing everyone else quite a lot more. And so it's that could be tied up into it as well, as much as I would hate to think that that people want people to be sick so that they can sort of sell them expensive things to sort of piece the bits together and eke along. I hope that's not the case. I'm sure some people have that motivation, but I would think it's more rare. I just don't think people really realize exactly how bad this is. I would hope anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think like the majority of politicians, it's so entrenched that carbohydrates are good for you, meat causes heart disease, etc. That really the vast majority of them are just kind of repeating that dogma and are happy to keep pushing along the sugar industry and all the carbohydrates and the thoughts that come with it.
Yeah, and I've already mentioned technocratic governance, Simon. Technocratic governance is really interesting. It's where you've got a body at top, government, which basically elects experts, specific experts in their field, and these experts often don't have a great understanding of the whole picture, and these experts basically then set into place methods of protocols or guidelines or whatnot. And that's what we see with the nutritional guidelines. These people are just rehashing the same tired old information. And going back to Anthony's point, I'll be less gentle there, and I'll say absolutely there's motivation to keep people sick. And we've spoken before of the big food or agricultural, pharmaceutical, medical, industrial complex, which this complex cannot function independent of each other. You need to have really badly done agriculture with the monocrop, terrible pesticides, fertilizers, so forth, to produce these foods that are used in that junk food industry by big food. And then you end up with a nation of people addicted to these foods that end up sick, requiring the medical complex. The medical complex, of course, is schooled by the universities, where our academia is fundamentally infiltrated with a lot of these conflicts of interest. So we've got an entire workforce of health professionals that think diet has nothing to do with disease. It's an absolute disaster. So it's a cultural problem, and I think it needs a massive shift, and it needs to be led by the doctors. I think the doctors need to kind of pick up themselves and pick up a powerful group of people, the population behind them, and I think a lot needs to change. But we're really swimming upstream against a very powerful tide.
Yeah, and and that's another good point too, is because you'll see that the different food industries will actually sponsor medical organizations, and the Diabetes Foundation, the American Heart Association, all the things they have funding from, like, I don't know, I'm just saying here, but like things like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and all these sorts of companies that are obviously selling things that aren't really good for them. So there's that absolutely that conflict of interest, and universities as well. The professors are generally quite compromised. Even in medical schools, there was a paper that came out, or a news article that came out talking about how bad the Harvard Medical School professors were compromised, and with the pharmaceutical industry, and they had all these different ties and being paid off by multiple different companies, and they weren't being transparent about it, and so they actually got. There was some sort of grading system. I forget what it was, but it was like basically they had an F grade in how compromised their professors were. And this was at Harvard, and some people say, well, wow, even at Harvard. I was like, especially at Harvard. I mean, when you have something to sell, you get a high price for it, and so it's going to corrupt a lot of people. And and talking about the technocratic society with just getting experts, and I have this expert in this thing, and so therefore they'll be able to get it. How'd that work with the Vietnam War? That's exactly what they did. They had all these I forget the name of the group, but it was like these experts, and I have this expert in this and this expert and all that, or just the most brilliant people, and they're just so great, and they just mismanaged this into a complete disaster. However you come along with the Vietnam War, I think everyone can agree that there was a lot of mismanagement of it, and a lot of that had to do with that sort of technocratic governance, that as opposed to letting people involved in the industry that had a sort of a wider view on things, and it directly affected them. Because if I go out and I'm a platoon leader and I make a mistake, I'm dead too. Whereas someone sitting there in a protected house somewhere, with a bunch of Secret Service agents just going, yeah, you guys should do this. He pays no price for being wrong.
Zero accountability.
Yeah. Yep. And it's not even like a politician who may get voted out. I mean, this guy's just been appointed. Like there's no fault. There's no drawback. There's no downside to this guy messing up. And so it doesn't actually have, the right, motivations and, motivations aside, but it may not have the right, things driving him to just make sure that he's not screwing up. But yeah, and I also think back about different societies that have limited meat specifically to sort of keep people sick and unhealthy and not as well. I know there was a post that you did, Pran, talking about in India, how they sort of took people out of the forest, took people out of the where they were living naturally, put them into sort of close clustered communities, and had them work in the big British plantations and factories, and they paid them in grain. And so and this is something that may have just been a happenstance. Like, this is just how we pay people. But you have to sort of wonder if that wasn't a bit thought out, of like, well, let's give these people this stuff that will sort of keep them a bit suppressed and mollified. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what happened in India was a very telling thing, and what you're alluding to there was the trees and forest acts, where the British basically took control of forests, the lakes, the farming land, and all the food was basically harvested and sent back to Europe or to England, to Imperial England. And the locals were paid in grains, and because the grains are obviously very difficult to enjoy from a palate perspective, a lot of the flavors in India, these curries that are so sought after in this modern world, a lot of those were created in that era, where these locals basically tried to make the food as palatable as possible. It's terrible. So people often ask me, I mean, I was born a Hindu into a Hindu family. I'm not practicing or anything like that. How can I eat beef if that's my background? Well, I say, well, I don't eat a colonial diet. I eat the diet that my forefathers prior to that indoctrination consumed. So with regards to, is that going on at the moment? It's a really difficult territory to read, Anthony, because I just look at what's occurring at the moment. There's no doubt, like, people like, Bill Gates and all these global elitists, Prince William, whoever, all these people espousing this idea of meat's bad for the environment, and that we should replace it with bugs and fake plant meats which are ultra processed. I can't see them consuming that. I can't see them consuming it.
No
but
way.
they want the masses to consume it. So in a way, that there you have a hoarding of a resource that they know is valuable, but they've somehow got to convince the masses not to consume it. And I think it's got to be done in a much more subtle fashion in this modern world. They can't come across with overt violence or overt acts of starvation. But perhaps these are the ways in which it's being employed. But the other side of me says, well, maybe they're not evil people. Maybe what's occurring at the moment is simply just an absolute farce where they've just gotten it wrong, because they seem to be locking up valuable farmland. There's a lot of this carbon regeneration where they're planting it with monocrop. New Zealand in particular, this is very, very, very concerning there, where they're losing prime agricultural land for grazing to monocrops of pine, which can't be used for anything.
Nuts.
I'm not. Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, I'm not a climate denier. There's no doubt that human beings are influencing the Earth's climate, certainly warming, and we're in that warming stage. We're perhaps coming out of an ice age, but the rate at which it's warming it's quite significant. It is quite significant. So, and we are contributing to that. There's no doubt about it with our modern agricultural methods, but planting out monocrop pine simply is not the way to do it, because you're taking out the ability to graze ruminants. Ruminants, when they graze properly and it's done in a regenerative way, they help sequester carbon. They're carbon, overall carbon negative, as opposed to a positive, like many people think. And they're part of the solution. And there's been some wonderful people in this space. Diana Rogers and Rob Wolf have written a fantastic book about it. But there's many more. And there's many more regenerative farmers doing this in practice, like Charlie Arnott in New South Wales is a fantastic regenerative farmer. And they're part of the solution, but that doesn't seem to be considered. So I can't help but wondering, perhaps this is just an oversight, that they've somehow made a mistake, and in this mad panic that the planet's somehow going to end suddenly, which seems to be a catastrophic prediction, that they're sort of overreaching. But I can't help but feel that there's something sinister going on, because I was in San Diego recently, beautiful part of the world, Anthony. Loved it. It was great. And we happened to go past Bill Gates' beachfront home over there. So he can't be too worried about climate change.
No,
the rising sea levels. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, Pran, I think a big part of it is disconnection from nature, agriculture, and the land. Because people are so, like, you look at Australia, the vast majority of the populations live, on the eastern seaboard in major capital cities, and how much exposure do they really get to farmland, open spaces, animals, and people who run these farms? And so there is kind of this sort of just total misunderstanding for what might be happening on rural properties where people are creating the most nutritious food possible. And these farmers are incentivized to care for their land and make sure that it's there for their children. And I think you have an honest discussion with 100 farmers, and 99 of them will say, yeah, I want to leave this place better for my kids than when I inherited it, when I bought it. And whether they all kind of are super tuned into the regen movement, or like they're grass-fed or whatever, they're trying to do the right thing. And some of these people who are they're ethical and they care about their land, they're being demonized, and they're being the finger's being pointed at them as being like these nasty people who are causing the climate to change, the world to end. And it's very convenient for for people like Bill Gates who want to take over and instead grow a heap of monocropped pea protein, and encourage people to buy that and convince them that it's better for their health, the environment, etc. So I think that disconnection is a big part of the problem.
Yeah, I think people have this idea that meat just kind of appears on the supermarket shelf, and
Mm.
fruits and vegetables and so forth just appear on the supermarket shelf. And you're right, they're completely disconnected. And this is often seen in groups that hunt. Like we've got hunters all through Australia, and these are some wonderful people, and I've hunted with them and been with them, and I keep in touch with them, very close with a lot of these hunters, and they get a lot of hate from people. But these are some of the most ethical people I've met. They obviously seek out this animal, spend hours seeking out deer. It's not easy hunting deer, Simon. And once the animal is the life is ended, they treat it with utter respect. I've seen some of the guys, literally with tears in their eyes as they harvest the animal. They thank the animal, they take away the meat, they value the meat, and then they eat it together as a group. And it's kind of how humans would have done it historically. No part of the animal is kind of left wasted, and that's the natural cycle of life. Whereas these are the guys copying hate, somehow made out to be these horrible, cruel people. But these people are deeply connected to the food and where it's coming from. And I think if more people did that, if more people hunted, if more people went on farms, actually saw what happened in farms, I think their perspective would change. But we've become caged in a concrete jungle, which is probably become our zoo. I think we're caged animals in this mess, and that's a fundamental part of where we've gone wrong.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that, when you just live in a city, you just think like this is just how the world is, and you really just don't know. Before, when it was more agrarian, and most people lived out on farms or in rural areas, or at least went there and went hunting, and maybe had a farm or a ranch, and everyone's sort of self-sufficient. People had a very different outlook on the world. It was much more realistic and rational sort of point of view. I mean, even just like, talking to people, and especially in Australia, when there's just nothing but open land, and talking about overpopulation. And it's just like, in Australia, really? And it's like, oh my God, yeah, look how crowded it is. Traffic's just getting worse, because they're thinking about their little microcosm
Yeah.
of the town they live in.
Mm.
And then you ask them, it's like, okay, you drive 5 minutes out of town, what do you see? Absolutely nothing. And you drive for, on the West Coast, there is no other city besides Perth, at all. Yeah, you go to little towns, that's it. And they're 8 hours drive between them, some of these things. And but even on the East Coast, it's like that as well. We live in concentrated huddles. And I point out to people that just in America, and America, obviously, continental US is about the size of Australia, and then we have Alaska, which is sort of another WA added onto that. And so it's a lot of territory, but we have 320 plus million people, as opposed to like sort of 25 to 30 million people in Australia. And yet the entire man-made footprint in America is only 5% of the open land. So 95% of the land in America, even with that many people, is still open. And when I was in Bangladesh, in the refugee camps there, it was this area smaller than Washington State, probably the size of Ireland, the country of Ireland. Bangladesh is roughly around there. And while Ireland has sort of like 5-6 million people, Washington State has around 7 million people, Bangladesh had 163 million people. And so you're just like, Jesus. And someone coming from Seattle going like, this must have been chaos, right? Because everyone lives in Seattle, and Seattle is chaos. It's miserable traffic. But right outside of Seattle, it's nothing but open land. And in Bangladesh, it was basically nothing but open land. They were just these natural, pristine jungles with wild elephants. That was actually a problem cool. in the refugee camps, because I mean, this is just, people not, we have examples of people being silly people all over the world. And they built this refugee camp, basically stripped this entire jungle, massive thing. It took an hour and a half to drive through this whole refugee camp. And obviously you're not driving that fast, it's dirt roads, but still took a long time to get through. And it's just tarps, tents made out of tarps, just as far as you could see. And they did this right through a major elephant migratory route. It's just like, guys. And so sure enough, the elephants come back, and they're just like, and elephants are like, this is my land, This is my route. Anything is in my way is going to get knocked down. And they just went straight through the refugee camp and just bowling through tents and buildings and things like that. Just there was
People are smart, aren't they? We're really highly evolved.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that they saw it coming. Like I talked to people when I was there, they're like, oh, actually, this is a migratory route. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. And I'm just like, and then it happened. Exactly what they thought was going to happen happened. And it was just like, Jesus, come on, guys. But yeah. But yeah, I think that when people are stuck in the cities, it's just going to be a different thing. You're going to have a different outlook and mindset, and I think that getting in touch with nature and all that sort of thing sounds sort of hippy dippy, but I think it really changed your perspective. And it sounds like you've been going hunting. That's something that I've been wanting to do. I do like to get out in nature, but I think that it's important to know where your food comes from and to be a realist and to be involved in that. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And and I want to eat meat, and I want to eat animals, and that's the right thing for me and my family. But I as a result of that, I should be man enough to go and do that myself, because that's what we are talking about, killing another animal so that we can live. And that is something to take seriously. That's something that humans have taken seriously. I mean, there's records in every society of this, the Native Americans, after they'd kill an animal, they'd pray to their spirits and thank them and do different sort of ritualistic things to help that spirit of that animal, have a blessed afterlife. And so I think that is something that we really should take seriously. And like you say, people that are hunting often do have much more respect for life and especially the life of the animals that they hunt than other people. These aren't just burgeoning serial killers that are going around, like killing the neighborhood cats and things like that. Like this is something they take very seriously and solemnly. To feed them and to help feed their family.
Absolutely, and meat's a very precious and expensive commodity now. So for some of these guys to be able to kill a deer or a goat or something like that would provide for many months. That animal would sustain them for many months. That's how much protein can be generated out of a single animal. And you're absolutely right. They are deeply connected. I wish more people were, see where our food actually comes from. But people are attracted to this idea of being in a city. And again, we're conditioned, Anthony. We're conditioned that we must go to school, we must do a university degree, must take out a loan. Most of us anyway. The smart ones sometimes opt out early, and once we've gotten a job following the university degree, now we've got to pay off the loan, we've got to get the house, settle in the house, get a mortgage, and we're conditioned to these things. Perhaps there's nothing wrong with opting out of society and out of that gentrified mess and saying, listen, I'm going to purchase rural land and going to live on land, because when you look at the property prices in these gentrified areas or in these suburbs in major cities, they're extremely high. And rural property can, you could buy hundreds of acres of land, or thousands even, for the same amount that you've dropped on a house in on a 300 square meter space in Sydney somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
So and this land always gives back. I mean, the land is often rich. I mean, depends on where you are, but you've got a good water source. It's often rich in things like wild goats and pigs and kangaroos and deer and whatnot. And you can obviously farm the land as well, regeneratively. Perhaps as time goes on, we'll see more people opting out of this modern day chaos in the cities and choosing that way of life. And as you said, huge proportions of Australia is unoccupied. The vast majority of it all is. And we know that human beings have a level of ingenuity where even the most arid lands can be regenerated into something more productive. If you can build a city like Las Vegas in the middle of a desert, we can certainly start up small communities and perhaps find our tribes in these, because I think we're very tribal people, and most of us are tending to segregate into these tribal groups on social media. Perhaps we can do it in real life in these communities outside of the city. But maybe I'm a romantic, and perhaps that idea may never come to fruition. But I think I think some of the smarter people will start seeing it this way.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, you can create that reality for yourself, and you are, Pran. You're working on that. But I think it's a pretty idyllic scenario where you've got a network of friends, say for example, across your state or across the country, and you can drop into their farm and property whenever and have these experiences of learning about how they're running their farm and their property, and go hunting together and spend time outside and have that real connection. And it's a bit sort of counter mainstream, because as you say, you know, we're certainly indoctrinated and conditioned into school, and then, you know, university, and then work, borrow, spend, repeat for 40, 50 years, retire, you know?
Yep. Retire on a superannuation, which the government's inflated away to nothing. So by the time you've gotten your superannuation packet, you know, when you buy a nice car or something like that, and the average age is, you know, it's 85. You got another 20 for 25 years having to try and survive on this mess. So these economic policies don't kind of help things. So I think people will have to seek a different method of doing it. Otherwise, they will have the decision made for them. I mean, there's a lot of talk about universal basic income and whatnot, and that's a sign of a socialist state. I think that's where we're all heading. Perhaps a few will see the light and make some changes, make some positive changes.
Yeah, I you know, the more I, you know, go on, like the more I see all this, I like the more attractive it is to just get a chunk of land somewhere and just live off the land and just live how people have lived for quite a long time. And I think that would be much more fulfilling. I keep looking at, like, you know, like different books and things like that on my shelf that I haven't had a chance to read in just months. And I'm just like, God, I really wish I just had time to just sit and just read and just do nothing except like do that. And you know, and just the thought of that, you know, just being out on land or having someone come over, hey, this is how we do this, that we have, and you have the time, you can take the time to have someone go around and go hunting and go do these things. And it's just like the thought of that is really appealing to me, because you're just talking about like you're just, your time is your own and you're living your life and you're surviving, and maybe your business is cattle, or you're at least self-sustained, and then your time is used for living as opposed to toiling. And that's very appealing to me the more I go. And you know, like as you say, you know, even in arid areas, I mean, look at you know, the Middle East and like Israel, they have very limited waters, so they have to be very they have to have a lot of ingenuity, and so they come up with a lot of different things. They have this watering system where they like goes through underground, and it just like drops out at the roots. And so it's just like the water is not efficient. Wasted. Yeah, it's very efficient. Whereas like most places are like, you know, flood irrigation, they just dump out a ton of water. Most of that is evaporating out and getting wasted. And because, you know, we're subsidizing this, well, we need the farmers, we need to do this, it's easy for them to waste it. And so they just go, yeah, it's coming in cheap. This is just how you do it. They don't have to be innovative. They don't have to be, you know, ingenious about it. Whereas in Israel, it's just like, no, this is the cost of water, whether you're getting, you know, having a glass to drink, having a shower, or, you know, planting crops. And so like, oh, okay, well, I have to figure out how to do this a little better. And so, you know, sometimes that's a driver for, you know, ingenuity when you're putting in stress. You know, there's no growth in a comfort zone. If this is just easy, then why change, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Anthony. You know, there's a phenomenal physicist in the 60s, Nikolai Kardashev. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's the guy who developed the Kardashev scale, and he talked about the 5 stages of human civilization, and he defined us, the current way we are, as a type 0 civilization. He said we will probably reach a type 1 status in about another 300 years. A lot of scientists that look into this area talk about. And in that, what a type 1 civilization kind of signifies, the ability to control everything around us, that we can utilize the sun for its energy source completely, be able to control weather patterns potentially as well, and just fundamentally terraform areas that are at the moment unlivable. I mean, we're talking about terraforming Mars, which to me sounds like madness, when we've got We've got so much land, and I don't think we're particularly overpopulated. But as a group, as a species, collectively, especially in the West, in the democratic West, places like Australia and America, there's this sense of self-loathing amongst people of our generation. They are hateful of themselves. The fact that they feel that they're contributing to this planet's destruction, somehow contributing to it. And it doesn't allow for a great mindset, I don't think. I mean, I don't think it spurns them into action. I think it spurns on a lot of mental health issues and anxieties and so forth. And many of them are choosing not to procreate because of a sense of self-loathing. And to me, that's madness. I mean, to be able to reproduce is one of the greatest gifts bestowed upon us, and we've got plenty of resources and declining birth rate. I think we need to change that mindset.
Humans are a key part of the ecosystem and the most important aspect of the world. And we can shape things to make things better, and we have ever since we've been alive. And I think it's for example, if you sort of look at like national parks as an example, people assume that, okay, if we just lock up land, don't do anything to it, that will somehow be more beneficial to the environment, or that will have some big net positive. But in reality, the best thing you can do is get people in there to run animals and landscape and create more, ponds and all sorts of stuff that is actually even better for the ecosystem. Like you could take an arid farm in Australia, lock it up, it'll still be an arid farm in 10, 20 years. But if you actually get people in there to regenerate it, you use it for practical means, it can still be profitable. It becomes something better than if you just don't have people. That people are helpful. The whole self-loathing, overpopulation argument, I think it's just crazy. And the thought that you'd be discouraged from raising a family with, productive children and teaching them everything you've learned and hoping that they surpass you, to think that that would be possibly something that you shouldn't do is just madness.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And we got to remember that Africa and Australia are so different in terms of their land, and we think that's just because of geography. It's not. Africa had vast, herds of ruminant animals millions of years ago, and these ruminant animals fundamentally changed that landscape. That's how they work, and that's why Africa's got grass and trees and doesn't have the same amount of deserts and so forth. That arid land that Australia has, we didn't have the ruminants here. We had these marsupial creatures that don't graze the same way. So really, it'll be lovely to get people to think that ruminants can kind of help us regenerate the planet, as opposed to help, as opposed to the destruction that they're causing. And what a wonderful solution, because not only do they provide that solution to make the planet greener, when farmed the right way, they've also provided us with this valuable food source where they're taking protein and amino acids generated from the soil and the grass and converting it into an edible protein that human beings can access, because we can't eat the grass directly. We can't access the same amount of nutrients and amino acids that the ruminants can. So it's just such a win-win situation. But to me, it blows my mind that we're being conditioned to believe otherwise.
Just to add on to what you guys were saying about people not wanting to procreate, like that's literally the biological meaning of life, and it could potentially be the spiritual meaning of life as well, to procreate, have kids, and for their next generations, and raise these people and see themselves in you, and have yourself live through them and through future generations. All life is trying to procreate and make more life. Like that is the purpose of life in a very strict sense. And so I think you're going to get very, very unhappy people when you do that. And I think a lot of these people are unhappy. They don't really realize just how important this is. And a lot of people, they go around, they think this is, they're partying, they're doing this, they're having fun. And then all of a sudden they have a kid and they go like, holy crap, like my life was meaningless before this, and now this is everything. And I don't even have kids, and I still recognize that phenomenon in other people. I certainly saw it in my nieces and nephews. I saw those kids, I was just instantly, I'm like, I need to be involved in these kids' life. Like I just adore these kids. I want to help them and protect them and just be around them. Like that was just so important to me. And and then talking about, the land management. Yeah, very interesting point about the ruminants not coming to Australia. I always sort of wonder like what it would be like, maybe if they did have like herds of buffalo and things like that. It'd be a very interesting place. And but like to Simon's point, when you do get people into the land, like it doesn't necessarily destroy it. People can, but like it's not in your best interest. Like there is a profit incentive to actually make the land usable and fertile and beneficial to not only themselves but to the environment. I mean, just think about forest management. In the areas where you have forestry is legal, and you have these forestry roads out there, and they cut down trees in certain ways, and then they replant them and regrow them because there's a profit incentive. They want those trees to grow back because they want to harvest them in the future. It's just like grain, except with a 30 to 50 year delay between your crop productions. And so they have to think very long term. And and so in the areas that don't allow that, well, you don't have these forestry roads, you don't have things sort of being cleared up and separated out, and all of a sudden you get forest fires. You have all this big accumulation of tinder and fuel, and no one can get to it because there are no roads to get in. It's very difficult to manage those fires, and actually you end up getting worse forest fires. You end up getting worse ecological disasters when you don't manage them. And so it's another example was people think of like hunting, and obviously, well, these animals are endangered. Obviously, you can't hunt them. Like that's just evil. That's what's made them endangered. Well, no, actually, poaching made them endangered, and the illegal culling and mass destruction of these animals without any thought, because the profit motive for them was just killing the animal, getting like the rhino horn or the elephant tusk. However, if you're hunting these animals, and if as a farmer or a rancher, and you say like, hey, someone is willing to pay me 50 grand, to hunt an elephant or a lion or something like that, that incentivizes them to make a very safe environment for lions and elephants and other Cape buffaloes and things like that. And so in fact, when that happened and the profit incentive went to people doing that, they actually went away from ranches, they went away from farms, and they actually went to habitat for wild animals with guards to protect against poachers and things like that. So in fact, these endangered animals actually started making a recovery. And so people don't think of those sorts of things. And that's why Thomas Sowell's book that I really like, Applied Economics, Thinking Past Stage One, it's a masterclass on how to think, and just sort of thinking, okay, if you do this, then what happens? Then what happens? Then what happens? And it's just working it down the line, and you actually find they're like, wow, okay, something very different than what I thought was going to come about happened.
Yeah, to your point about the hunting, Anthony, it's like poacher versus hunter. Poacher gets such a big return for just culling as much as they can initially, and then they get that one big payback, and then they're out. They don't care. Hunter, they're not going to go and kill the females, for example, because you need there to be enough population to repopulate, because that's what you do. That's your land, that's your sport, that's your source of food. So the incentive is to have something that goes on forever to the next generation. You're actually building and creating something, and that's where it's just such a crucial difference, that long-term incentive.
Yeah. Well, great.
I've got just a quick question here, Pran. Before you mentioned glyphosate, and I've seen you posting stuff about glyphosate on Instagram, and I really don't know anything about it. I think it's some sort of chemical that's used in food production. Can you explain, please?
Yeah, it's probably the largest pesticide or the biggest pesticide delivered on our or used on our foods. It's primarily used in monocrops such as wheat and soy and corn, which obviously make up 60% of the Western world's calories, and add in a few other plants, it makes up a huge proportion of our calories. Probably up to 90% of the global food calorie comes from plants, and a lot of this is now used or grown with chemical agriculture. Now, glyphosate is a very interesting compound. It's fundamentally an antibiotic and a pesticide. Now, this this product comes from a company called Monsanto. Monsanto are the same guys. Anthony mentioned the Vietnam War. Monsanto are the guys that produced Agent Orange, which was sprayed on the Viet Cong to basically to kill the foliage, right? To uncover these pockets of resistance by the U.S. Army, because obviously the Viet Cong were utilizing that shrubbery and the dense forest in Vietnam to kind of to hide and to wage their war. So this agent was employed with great effect, and it's still causing birth defects to this day. That's not debatable. It's you're getting kids born with severe mental retardation. There is limb defects. There's eye defects. People born without eyes. It's affected millions of lives even to this day. And that's the company that Bayer, a drug company, of course, acquired to make their product Roundup. Or when Bayer bought it, Roundup was already part of Monsanto's armory. But Roundup's not too dissimilar chemically from a structure from Agent Orange. It's a few chains different, a few carbon chains different, I think. And this product is thought to be safe for us humans to consume. And that's the regulator has deemed that. And like if you look up the Australian government website on glyphosate, it'll tell you glyphosate is safe to be consumed in food. But the way glyphosate is used, it is used on plants, and it's used on plants that are engineered to be resistant to it. Okay, you can't just go and spray it on an ancient species of wheat because you would kill it. So you have to have Roundup ready crop. So that's genetically engineered seeds made by Roundup, by the company. They sell the seeds. So these things like wheat and corn and so forth, these are Roundup ready, which just means that the Roundup can be used indiscriminately on them, and it won't kill the native plant or that plant because it's engineered not to die with it. But the crazy thing about it is they use that, and then eventually when it comes to actual harvesting, they use a method called desiccation, which increases the harvest yield, where the Roundup is then sprayed again at a heavier dose, where it dries the actual plant, which makes it easier for the machines to go through and harvest the crop. So that's a huge amount of Roundup being delivered on these monocrops. And as a result, it's now detectable in 80% of Americans in their urine. They've got detectable levels of glyphosate. About 99% of a sample population in America. I suspect about 80 to 90% of Australians would test positive on this glyphosate test. Not great when you're pissing Roundup, you know what I mean? Or it can't be great for you. Now, all that doesn't sound terrible because the Australian government said it's safe. And and they're right. The human cells lack something called a Shikimate pathway, which glyphosate inhibits. That's how it exhibits its herbicidal action. But the problem, Simon, is 60% of the human gut microbiome is sensitive to glyphosate, and that has not been studied. It's simply not been studied. I mean, everyone wants great gut health. Pretty bloody hard to do if we're chowing down on a pesticide, which ends up in our colon, affecting the gut microbiome, because that's where the microbiome is at their highest density in our lower gut. And I think, I certainly, maybe I can complain it's keeping me in a job because we've got a whole host of the population with gut issues and so forth. But I think in 10 years or 5 to 10 years, hopefully we will discover that this was a major player in disease. And it's certainly been implicated in a lot of cancers like non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, and Monsanto and Bayer have paid out billions already. So there's something going on, and I hope that as a gastroenterologist I can kind of advocate for the population and say we should not be supporting these crops that are treated with it, and we should be looking to buy organic food stuff. Expensive, of course. Now, one of the beauties with these with the carnivore diet is animal products don't seem to accumulate the glyphosate. And I think, and I honestly believe, and I wanted to speak, I'd get Anthony and probably Sean Baker at some point to comment on it. Perhaps that's one of the major mechanisms of the carnivore diet. It's just a pesticide-free diet, basically. Contains all the essential amino acids and probably nutrients for life, right? And, it gives you an adequate fuel source in the fat that contains most of these essential fats as well. But in addition to that, it just lacks that pesticide level, that a lot of our grains have now got, and sadly our fruit and vegetables and berries and whatnot have got as well. So I think it's a major player, and it's something that I look forward to exploring in the years to come, because there's a lot that needs to be done with regards to it.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I was just going to say quickly, just to answer your question on that, and then just put my thoughts on it. I think that is one of the main things with the carnivore diet is it's not only that meat is a very good source of nutrition and fatty acids and protein, but it specifically eliminates out things that are harmful for us. And that's why, I tell people that, it's as important, if not more important, what not to eat as opposed to what to eat. Everyone's focused on, what do I eat? What do I eat? I'm really focused on what don't you eat? Don't eat these things, and pesticides and Roundup and everything like that. Absolutely. And obviously, I talk about the different, defense chemicals that plants have as well, and how they affect your body. So I think that is absolutely the fundamental point that I try to make in advocating for a carnivore diet, is that you are eliminating out things that cause direct harm to our bodies. And, so you're getting everything you need from meat, and you're eliminating out all the things that cause harm. So yeah, I think that's absolutely a major part, because I mean, I've eaten 90% of my calories have come from meat my whole life. Like that is, I've always really, really liked that. And so it's, and I still felt wildly better when I just eliminated out that last little bit of things. And so, it's, and a lot of people will eat meat, and they'll eat a lot of meat. And some people, they're very overweight and they're very unhealthy, and they're, I like meat, I eat meat, and they obviously blame it on the meat. But really, even though you're eating a lot of meat that's healthy for you, all these other things are causing a serious amount of harm, and you can't run away from that. It doesn't matter how much meat you eat. If you're eating other things that cause harm, you're going to get that harm.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And one of the things, Anthony, to speak to that point about plant-based defense, it's interesting when you've got a viable gut, when you've got a small intestine that's viable, not leaky, doesn't have these horrible, interstitial spaces that have opened up. We call it leaky gut, of course, and I think most people have heard of that. When you've got a well-functioning gut, it should be able to deal with a lot of these anti-nutrients and plant-based chemicals, but the problem is we don't. We've got guts that are just leaky and terrible and bad health. So this is why I think the mechanism of a lot of things like lectins and gluten and plant-based chemical comes into it. There's no doubt about it. For human beings, throughout the course of history, since the advent of the first primates that started to walk, 3.5, 4 million years ago, we have always valued that which is most nutrient dense, and there is just simply no argument. Animal source food, well above anything else, and we've obviously been farming for the last 10,000 years. We picked up little adaptations to that. We've been able to increase our tolerance to things like starch and so forth, and not just that, but to also break down fats in plants, to incorporate them into medium chain triglycerides, which is essential to us. So we've picked up a few adaptations along the way. So we're extremely adaptable. Problem is we can't adapt ourselves to this chemical shitstorm that corporate agriculture is spewing on us. And not only that, they've kind of got farmers addicted to this method of farming. I mean, you just have to look at Sri Lanka to see that the switch, which was turned on them suddenly, where they were farming in an inorganic way, utilizing chemicals like glyphosate and whatnot and other pesticides. When the political decision was made that they were going to become organic to improve their ESG score, which is this crazy system that the globalists have decided that is what dictates good quality governance. When they decided to do that, their crop yields, when they went from pesticide-based farming to organic farming, dropped by about 30%. And it's just food supply is just on such a tight, thin string that was enough to tip that country into starvation, from which they're probably not going to recover. So organic farming can't be introduced suddenly, right? And which is what this madness worldwide around the governments, where places like Canada and Netherlands are starting to suddenly introduce organic farming or cutting down fertilizer and nitrogen emissions and so on and so forth. that cannot be suddenly done. It needs to be slowly transitioned, probably a 10-year transition, where farmers slowly embrace that regenerative method, and they're sort of, that's a slow process. So, I mean, we face some very, very interesting times ahead, and I'm not quite sure why the sudden decision to push people into organic farming. I think it's
politics.
It's politics, and to bring down carbon emissions and so on and so forth. I don't think it's necessarily to bring the rise of regenerative agriculture, but we've got a good opportunity as a species to really kind of honestly terraform the planet. But we're going to have to utilize ruminants to be able to do it. But the madness in all this politics is blinding many, and sadly they've got vast majority of the population brainwashed to a point where they feel genuinely that not only will a steak cause bowel cancer and heart disease, it's probably destroying the planet. I mean, good luck being healthy with that sort of attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, and so just as a definitive chop on that, when everyone says, red meat does cause bowel cancer, and they always go back to that. So, that red meat's hard to digest. It's difficult. It sits in your body and just rots. There's putrefaction, which can cause all sorts of, nasty byproducts, and can be carcinogenic, and it increases your rates of bowel cancer as well, which I've heard many colorectal surgeons parrot. What are your thoughts on that?
It's absolute bullshit, Anthony. I think let's put it this way, okay? Let's put it this way. If you're a smoker, Anthony, your lifetime risk of lung cancer is enormous. I think it goes up something like 3,000%, 30-fold higher than someone who's not a smoker. That's your relative risk, 30 times higher. So 3,000% is your relative risk. Now, in someone who eats processed meat every day, your lifetime risk is something like 5.3 out of 100 versus a vegetarian who's 4.5 out of 100. That's their lifetime risk of bowel cancer. So that increases your absolute risk by about 1.18, which in relative risk works out to be 18%. That's in someone who eats processed meat every day, right, versus a vegetarian. Now, processed meat, what sort of foods is that found in? Burgers, pizzas.
Meat lovers pizza.
Yeah, meat lovers pizza. So it tells you something about the type of person eating it. Not only that, the relative risk is extremely small. And not only that, I mean, to top things off, the World Health Organization lumped in red meat, non-processed red meat, a grass-fed finished steak, as a probable carcinogen based on the data from processed meat. I mean, that to me, if that is not a hit job on red meat, I don't know what is. And so it begs, it honestly blows my mind that there are people out there suffering significant metabolic syndrome who will finish off a bowl of pasta or 2 bowls of pasta with no queries, eat a bowl of ice cream, and then sit there on the couch watching Netflix while finishing off a packet of Tim Tams, but they won't do a steak because they think that's going to kill them. I mean, that just shows you how indoctrinated the population's become.
Yeah, and that they're overweight and sick because they don't have a chance to go to the gym or something. That's another one that's funny. That even people in the a carnivore community or keto, they still think like, oh, but you have to work out all the time. You have to do this, or you just get fat and you'll get sick, and that's the only thing, staving off disease. And it's I don't know why that one's gotten in. I think that's probably from the 80s as well, when everyone was getting, they said that fat makes you fat gives you heart disease, and everyone stopped eating that and they started eating fruits and vegetables, and they started getting fat and sick. And well, this is because we're not exercising. And so maybe that's where it comes in, but there's a bit of a disconnect there as well, that they think that their diet isn't all that, doesn't make that much of a difference. And maybe they think they're eating healthy because they're not eating, animal fats and things like that, but they're overweight, they're sick just because they don't work out. And that's the only difference in health, is I work out more than those people do. And I always love pointing out that, like, actually you probably work out more than I do. Like, how often you work out? Like, this time I'm like, that's 3 times more than I work out, and it's just like, and they just get pissed by that. And but some people actually look at that and just go like, or they just don't believe me. But other people will, if they get it and they get that I'm serious, they'll all of a sudden, that's when they'll start thinking like, okay, maybe there is something to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think good nutrition, good hormonal health, good muscle health fundamentally drives you to exercise. You're compelled to exercise. You know what I mean? You can't help but exercise. So it's very difficult to exercise when your body's broken. So I think the fundamental is basically nutrition. You've got to fix nutrition. That's 80% of it, and exercise is maybe 5%. 15%, and probably sleep and things like that. Sleep's probably actually greater than that. But get the nutrition right, and generally things will fall into place. You've got to get the nutrition right before you leap into the gym and so forth. That's my perspective on it.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Well, if your body's not working right, like you said, it's not going to perform very well when you're working out. You're gonna be pretty miserable. And
it won't be fun.
No, it's not fun. And I feel amazing when I'm working out, as eating the way I do. And I even think about that as when I was playing sports and getting into the season, and I was out of shape, and eating just a normal sort of kid diet, or not even sugar and all that crap, because my parents never had that stuff in there. But it was like whole grains and actual meat and things like that. It was always whole foods, and so I got lucky there, and I just always gravitated to meat. But I would be out of shape, and I would just feel rotten for like the first month or so of a sports season. And then you get into shape, and you start feeling good, and you start going, and now you feel good, and it's easier to work out and feel better. So it self-perpetuates itself. But now, even if I don't work out or anything like that, I can just hop right back in, and I feel great every time I work out. Because my body's it's not as conditioned as I would like it to be, but at the same time, it works properly. And so I feel good exercising. And like you say, it makes you want to exercise, because you feel good when you exercise. You're mobilizing more energy. When you burn energy, it makes you feel better. So why people take stimulants and drink coffee and things like that, and or do pre-workout drinks and things like that, because they feel better when they're burning more energy. And so I go in there and I'm burning energy. It makes me feel better as I'm working out. It's not just like after I work out, I'm like, oh, well, I'm glad I work out. It's like, no, like as I'm working out, like I feel better as I'm working out. And so I don't want to stop working out. And so that can be a problem as well, because I'll go to the gym and I'll just be there for like 3 hours. I don't want to go. And it's just like, I can't do that, And so it's a very, very different game when you're fueling your body properly.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen people, Anthony, flick, and I'm sure you have as well, flick out of type 2 diabetes with no change to their exercise level. Some of these people are extremely sedentary, just utilizing fundamentally a low carbohydrate diet, which we implement with our dietitians. Nutrition is everything. It's at the heart of everything. We just got to get it right, I think. And I don't think there's any reason. This is my pitch from my perspective. I know you guys might have a different perspective on it. I don't think there's a reason to even be full carnivore. I mean, that might be the optimal spectrum, but if people choose to incorporate other things, that's fine. Just at least get the quality protein target up to at least 30%. And I think people will find that things just click and fall into place. At the moment, people are woefully low. I think their intake of protein or animal protein, or even protein in general, for Americans, is about 10 to 12%, which is woeful, which is absolutely woeful. So just basic steps, I think, need to be taken, and people just need to kind of optimize it. And, they can still enjoy a varied diet, but I think with the caveat that let's hope that it doesn't have glyphosate in it, which I think is a big player.
Yeah. And
sure.
and like you were saying, through the in American, most Western countries, they're getting sort of 10-12% of protein in their diet, as per caloric intake, and the problem with that is a lot of the stuff is plant proteins, and and a lot of that's not going to be bioavailable. I mean, just in wheat, 80% of wheat proteins are gluten, and gluten's not bioavailable like really at all. Like we really can't really break that down properly and absorb it as its constituent amino acids. And then so whatever that 10%, and then there's the difference between crude protein and actual protein. Or crude protein is how they measure protein in plants, they just say how many moles of nitrogen are in here. That must be how many moles of protein are in here. Where in fact there are other non-proteinaceous nitrogen sources in plants, and so that's a sort of a miscalculation. Yeah, well, it's a miscalculation. So you think that you're getting all this protein, and first of all, no, you're not, and second of all, it's generally not bioavailable. And then they have protease inhibitors in ththings like wheat and soy and many other plants that even if you're eating that, like eating like a sandwich, with wheat bread, and you eat that with meat, it's going to block protease from your pancreas. So even the bioavailable animal protein is all of a sudden not as bioavailable, and so it's a lot worse than people think as well. But I was it's always great to hear that you have nutritionists working for you, because most nutritionists I talk to, they're just of the mindset of just like no, you gotta feed diabetics bread and pasta, and that's the best thing for them. And how do you find these diet nutritionists that actually think properly?
Yeah. Well, it's I've always believed in that concept of social capital, Anthony, and building out your tribes, and that's what I've been good at. And I'm not a particularly smart guy, but what I'm good at is basically building relationships, and ultimately we've been able to build a phenomenal relationship with Jessica Turton, who's our head dietitian, lovely girl, lovely woman, I should say, and very well researched. And she's brought some other phenomenal members of the team. We've got Tom, Natasha, Kieran, Nikki. We're growing. So, and I hope there's more dietitians that come on this journey with us, because we can't do it without them. We as doctors, at time poor, we're not trained specifically in the art of diet, and nor do I personally have the patience to go through a dietary plan with people. I think we need people trained to be able to deliver this message. And I think there's legitimacy when it comes from a trained dietitian who's accredited. So my philosophy is we just got to keep building with the right people. And I've certainly been lucky in finding my team, and we're going to keep growing it.
Yeah, you've got a great team. Jess is fantastic. All right, guys, let's wrap there, and let's do this again. That was a lot of fun.
Definitely.
So, Pran, thank you so much for jumping on the show. It was great to chat to you.
Brilliant, lovely to see both of you guys again. Anyway.
Yeah, man, great to see you as always.